Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be at any conference that's organized by our extraordinary graduate students here at the University of Pennsylvania, and also an honor and a pleasure to be able to say anything that can deepen or enrich your appreciation of the wonderful Lod show upstairs. Now, mosaic is a form of art, also utilitarian medium, that began in the 4th century Greek world. Floor mosaics at ground level are arguably the single most durable medium of monument-scale Roman art and decoration. With their hard cubes, stone, glass, terracotta, tesserae are the little cubes from which mosaics are constructed, firmly embedded in durable concrete, nice, flat, durable concrete. Most Roman-era houses that we find across the vast empire have been stripped of most or all of their statues when they had them, their painted wall plasters crumbled away, the intarsia work of stone and glass tiles, called opus sectile, often pulled out for reuse. But all over the Hellenistic and then the Roman imperial and late antique world, and I'm showing you on the left a detail, an aerial view of some of the mosaic houses, 4th century Pella and Macedon, and on the right, a view of the salvage excavations of the mosaics at Zeugma in Turkey taking place. All over this world, archaeologists can recover floor mosaics, even when, as at Lod and so many other sites, mud brick walls have melted, stone fallen, or been robbed out. Tesserae were very seldom pulled out, actually, at overbuilt sites for recycling. Now, while Roman mosaics came to decorate public spaces, from baths and temples, in late antiquity, sidewalks, as well as late Roman churches and synagogues, the bulk of this corpus of many, many thousands of floors comes from private houses. Any house with fine mosaic at all typically had many or all of its non-utilitarian rooms thus floored. When we have the archaeological good fortune to find whole cities, there's Pompeii, whole city zones preserved at least at the ground floor level, it's very clear that very elite houses, and the Lod Mosaic, the scale of its extant rooms, proves comes from such a house. Elite houses vied to provide the spectacle of grand mosaic. So domestic Roman mosaics give us a very special window into how all around the Mediterranean, Romans and then the Romanized people of all the provinces, including Judea, as individuals wanted their house to offer rich decors. It shows us some of what they thought about when they chose motifs for family and guests to take pleasure in. And also how, when they moved around in the domus, or reclined or sat, mosaic decoration collaborated with architecture and space to suggest and to reinforce the itineraries of daily life and banquet. And here I'll say a note about the Roman house. Romans were deeply invested in the domus, the house, as the core to life as a clan or a citizen, and their houses were very permeable to public business as well as to guest. So that already very early in the Republic, house decoration seemed to have been understood as drawing a picture of the owner-patron's persona, a kind of stage to complement the house inhabitants. What art historians and historians call self-fashioning, self-representation. So it's not only as a portal into Roman visual language and modes of seeing, but as the stuff of social history for the peoples of the empire that all of us here would like you to consider the genre of Roman mosaics, which is why the speakers of the second half of this program today take you away from art itself into its social and religious context. Now, I have only a very short time to talk to you today, and let's see, 200 plus 600, 800 years of Roman mosaic cannot be fitted into a 20 or 30-minute talk. So I picked images that can especially help us understand the broad world of some very wide choices within which the first owners of the Lod house and the workshops that they hired to execute their mosaics decided to decorate the floors of the spectacular rooms in the way that they did. And to remind us that these rooms serve not only simply pleasurable inhabitation, but also serve the aesthetic and thoughtful pleasure of guests who would certainly have circulated here, as we hope you will circulate upstairs. Okay. And I'm going to very, very briefly introduce you to the Lod site, which Brian Rose is going to go into in more detail. And here is an aerial view of the current rescue excavations, with some overbuilt later wall cutting across this section of the mosaic. And what you see upstairs is a part of the grand salon here. This room had multiple entrances. You see here at, let's see if the pointer works. You see here, up here, a transverse entrance into the Grand Hall, decorated aniconically with a magnificent silver crater flanked by golden urns, signs of hospitality and feasting. Actually, let me cut back for a second. When you were in the room and moved back and forth between this room and that, you've got a threshold mosaic that also has an urn with vines coming from it, that's on the central axis with this scene of two little panthers clambering comically, about to fall into the wine inside that urn. They think it's milk. And here is the Grand Hall, which, as you see, has at one end this panel of fish that I'll come back to in a moment, fish in a maritime landscape. Over here, a geometric grid, the little cells filled in with various animals, with fish, and with a lucky peacock. And in the center here, the main geometric floor, whose interstices are filled. There's our little panther and urn with birds, fish, and animals. And in the center, a scene that Brian will go into in much more detail, exotic and local animals, that humpback bull is Middle Eastern, lions, an elephant, and so on, in a kind of fictional rocky landscape. Remarkably, they're not attacking each other. Remind us of that. And this is a good point at which to say that unlike most of the mosaics I'll show you, or at least many of the mosaics I'll show you, one of the things that interests us about the Lod floor is that there are no human beings, which is interesting for a mosaic in Judea. And here is a view, the sort of main view, the view looking directly on axis at the beast group. Now, Roman halls, with mosaic flooring, what you'll typically see often in a museum or in an image in a book, you'll see the main figural decoration. But what is usually not shown and not cropped for museum display is the surround that's left blank or very plainly floored for chairs and for couches for guests to gather. One of the things about this all-over mosaic that you see, and I'm going to put that in some context, is that guests or members of the family who sort of sit anywhere in the room have something to look at head-on, as well as, even if they're going to miss the privileged view of that central mosaic. And there is the fish panel that you'll hear more about later, that gives us a vista onto ocean, the way that the other decorations in the room suggest the land. A maritime landscape that's being traversed by this ship. And just to tell you to go in the Roman galleries to look at our own 3rd century ship mosaic. A lot of this room is about hospitality, and that's the theme with which I chose most of my images today, as well as picking some formal characteristics. This, for instance, belongs to the genre of guest gift pictures, xenia, fish in a basket ready to be cooked for dinner, like the banquets that would have been offered in this house. There's also these floors of this second room that are in the process of being cataloged and cleaned, with a mosaic of little birds scattered as if in a landscape over the white ground here, and another geometric floor that also includes birds. And here's a view of that tiny little panel, which is in the process of being cleaned. Now, all of these iconographies belong to a Roman corpus of motifs that image the auspicious and the hospitable house, with a lot of wit and playfulness in the way individual figures are shown, and sort of a microcosm-macrocosm effect here working with land and sea. Now, this kind of decoration, this kind of complex house program goes back to the very beginning of Roman imperial domination. And we'll start with the House of the Faun, just to take you back into the 2nd century BC, where you can see that already Romans have sort of established a kind of program that is going to last for more than half a millennium. And here's a view of the House of the Faun, its courtyard with the dancing faun that gave it its name. And here is the axonometric plan of what is the largest mansion in Pompeii. It was enlarged and decorated in the middle of the 2nd century BC. And its mosaics were preserved for over 200 years. evidently as a kind of art treasure to the point when they were covered by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79. And here you see the kind of plan, the kind of tag montage plan that it's good to use to think with about a house. Here's the Alexander Mosaic, the very famous Alexander Mosaic that had a purpose-built room, and the other mosaics emphasize animal life and Dionysiac themes. There's a view of the special viewing room that was made for the Alexander Mosaic and the Nile strip that ran in front of it. Dionysiac motifs of dramatic masks hanging in garlands that welcomed you into the house. This baby Dionysus getting drunk, riding a tiger. And little animals and little birds inhabiting various rooms. To Romans, the idea of the friendly house and the blessed house is that birds will wander in and out, that you get peaceable animals inside. These are toying with a woman's jewel box. And they also love fish. Now, I like fish mosaics too. You'll actually see several in this talk of this kind of maritime landscape with fish who are very accurately depicted. We can pick out different species of fish in these floors in a tradition that's going to last into the 4th and 5th century. And I'm showing you these to show that mosaic is, in a way, a kind of ingrown art with its own kinds of pattern books that get transmitted for a very long time. And this role of hospitality comes out in this guest gift picture of a little fountain pool with ducks swimming in it, a cat attacking a pet bird, and here are the ingredients for a fish dinner, a seafood dinner, assembled on the cool marble that edges the pool. Now, what you've been seeing are the kind of picture panels typically centered in a floor that we call an emblema. And those are, to many people, the most spectacular of Roman mosaics, inserted in the center of floors, sometimes in their own separate stone trays. And I'm cutting ahead to 3rd century Antioch in Turkey today, in the Roman province of Syria, and showing you a typical very lavish room with multiple emblemata, and here you see the surround for couches, welcoming you with a mythologized image of Dionysus and Hercules banqueting, with the kind of urn that you see in the abstract composition in the Lod Mosaic, and the Judgment of Paris here. And you can see this kind of multi-directionality. This is oriented for people coming in. This is oriented for people sitting at the back and around the top. And a good example of how houses compete and by emulating one another, as well as by having different mosaics, is that we have very similar drinking scenes at other houses in Antioch, like the House of the Drinking Contest here, where you see the emblema recessed at the back of the room and a close-up of this architectural frame. And this is the kind of plan that we work with now. We try to think about sight lines in a house, the way that the courtyard is arranged, so that from here you can see all the way over to this fountain, the way that rooms here look out at the gardens and into other rooms, and the Lod house would certainly have had such gardens and such a peristyle. You also get artists and patrons competing to do very special floors, very inventive and witty conceits. This is at Antioch, the House of the Buffet Supper, in, a circular dining recess where the couches would have gone like this, and in front of the guests, literally, are the serving dishes and drinking ware for a festive dinner. They competed to make floors in which you could literally walk on another world. This is a superb example of a maritime, actually riverine mosaic from Bad Kreuznach in Germany, where walking around the mosaic, this is oriented this way, these two this way. There's the stadium with Oceanus, figures acting out scenes of port cities, and sailing the open water with fish scattered through it. A mosaic of which the owner was so proud that he let the mosaicist actually sign. There's Victorinus's inscription. And this kind of repertoire spreads over 2nd and 3rd century Roman Empire. Here's a very fine floor from North Africa at Slitten with seasons imaging the fertility of the land, and separate little panels, again with fish and with little nilotic scenes. In the same house, to see the range, we see the same conceit of a geometric floor with a composition that's broken up into separate elements, but this one's surrounded by gladiatorial games. But clearly you were meant to go from room to room and appreciate the ways in which decoration was both similar and different. What Romans like to do is in the city, imagine the countryside. This is from, as it says, downtown Corinth, showing the owner as a villa owner with happy, happy peasants, bringing gifts to the domina, attending on her up here. And in the countryside, they like to imagine the city. This is the Iacto Villa that is suburban to Antioch with an ocean floor up here. There's Thetis, a personification of greatness of soul in the middle here. Hunts in the middle of the floor, but all around it, what the border was an image of Antioch itself, so that you would perambulate the room. And I want to stress this character of perambulation. People didn't just sit still. It's clear that for pleasure, you were also meant to walk a room and look closely at every little detail, or at least 10 of the details, the way you're going to look at the mosaic today and what the Lod Mosaic is designed for. One of the characteristics of the happy house is the vision of a semi-idyllic countryside, at least, like this animal mosaic from Seuss at the House of the Ostriches. This is typical of a kind of dining room where you have couches here and a long strip, like a fashion catwalk with the people on either side. That's what you're seeing here, with hunters simply watching this Paradisos, or mythologized in something like this Orpheus floor here, a kind of idyllic scene of animals at peace gathered around the divine singer. And of course, xenia. One of the wonderful things about looking at fish and at looking at birds and animals is Romans said, we will also eat these for dinner. These are people who actually talk about having fish ponds, where you can feed the fish, make friends with them, and then pick out what you're going to eat afterwards. And this is one of my favorite genres of Roman mosaic, are these xenia, guest gift floors, still lifes made of what's going to go into a banquet. I tried to pick our kinds of specialty foods. There's an artichoke, and there's asparagus, there's fish, and there's a fowl, and this enormous lunette at Seuss in North Africa that shows you a similar composition scattered around this actual lunette floor. Now, these all-over mosaics, these things that will work for any direction, which is a very interesting formal characteristic of the Lod floor, are imaged for us in floors with extraordinary large-scale monumental decoration. Here at Antioch again, the so-called Villa Constantina, with hunts oriented like this, like this, like this, like this, separated by these ribs, these spandrels. This mimics ceiling decoration, as do the Lod grids. With the seasons here, these rich acanthus borders, and then little still lives of birds. This is the repertoire from which the Lod bird panel, for instance, comes. Now, we get multiple styles in late antiquity, 2nd to 4th. Some owners prefer very richly figurated mosaics and emblema floors. Others favor kinds of all-over pattern, which we tend to say, oh, that's just decoration. But it's clear that we shouldn't dismiss it in that way. This is the Grand Villa at Piazza Armerina in Sicily, and the next speaker is going to show you more details from it. Every single one of the habitation rooms is very richly mosaicked, and here is a geometric, gridded composition from what we call the Room of Cupid. The corridors were floored with a continuous mosaic of acanthus with animal protomes, which we can talk about slightly as a sort of hierarchy of decoration. Other floors let you walk a maritime landscape, as in this mosaic of Venus, Triton, and the mythological singer Orion. Others let you wander in an idyllic landscape with hunters, or walk into a room where you could walk through the labors of Hercules. And this shows you the enormous variety that could be contained even within a single house. If we had more rooms of the Lod house, who knows, we might have things liberated from their grid into full-scale figures. So the Lod mosaic falls between a taste for geometric mosaics on the one hand. This is an extraordinarily large villa in Gaul, clearly a luxury villa that had only geometric mosaics. And the grid mosaics of the late Empire that delight in breaking up figure groups into multiple little cells, like the Muse mosaic from Victon, or the Gladiator mosaic from Nennig. What we're seeing at Lod actually is partly a North European fashion, which is interesting for the mosaic workshops. So to come back around to our floor, you can see that the enormous diversity of motifs, of contrasting and complementary panels, is kind of like a distilled version of some of the big Roman houses that I very briefly just showed you. And before I pass on to Brian, I'll wish you all very happy refreshments at a break, and close with this Neopaphos mosaic of a fortunate peacock. Thank you very much.